Carl and Brendan here from Games, Brains and Head-Banging Life, gbhbl.com for short. And it is, of course, Sometimes Dead is Better, where we take a look at Stephen King adaptations, book to movie. You know, Stephen King is a pretty famous author, not just horror, but predominantly known for it. And of course, famously alongside that are a ton of movie adaptations that are mostly range from bad to terrible. With the occasional bright spark amongst them. Notice the title we chose for this series, Sometimes Dead is Better. It was snappy, it was easy, it's also quite iconic, but it also comes from one of his adaptions, one of his most loved, respected, and liked adaptions. It is, of course, Pet Sematary. This is what we're going to be talking about, the 1989 supernatural horror film. And now, because of modern times, the first adaptation of the 1983 novel of the same name. Because, of course, we do not know, this film was readapted, remade, whatever you want to call it, in 2019. But, of course, we're not talking about that. We are talking about the original. Do you remember Falling Away? And we started Falling Away the last time, by me saying that it was a movie I remembered not enjoying, and then found I really, really enjoyed it. This is kind of the opposite, in the sense that I hadn't seen it for a while, and I always remember loving it. But on a rewatch for this, I found I didn't love it as much as I remembered, and I found myself picking apart problems in it more than I expected.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I think that's probably just time, isn't it? I think we become critical because that's what we do now. We're critics as such. So we are more likely to judge things differently. I think now that we're older as well, maybe as well. You know, I do look at things now and I go, oh, look at that. Do I like that camera angle? Whereas in the past, I was just like, oh shit, he's dead. You know what I mean? And that's a bit obviously an exaggerated view of it, but like that does change over time. I think I rewatched it. I remember it well. I've seen it. I'm sure you have too. I've seen it when I was a lot younger, many times. Not once, like many times.
Too young to see it as well. Way to appreciate. Yeah.
I've read the book. I've seen the newer version of it, and I did the same. I found myself picking many faults in this, but I did still come out of it. And I think straight after it, if somebody had asked me straight after what do you think of that film, I would have been more critical. But even weirdly now, as a couple of like hours or days have passed, I feel myself kind of like back to like, it's a good movie. You know,
its positives far outweigh its negatives.
It's got charm like to it, like for its era especially. You know, I do think like sometimes when I look back at some of the films I remember from when I'm younger. And that's not to say that this one isn't dated, but like there is dated and then there's like uncomfortably dated. Like, you know what I mean? Like this is comfortable. And I know a point in it where I was like, that's shit. Well, that's shit. And I was like, this, you know what? This has still got charm.
There's a lot of this movie that still holds up. And there are things that happen that nowadays I don't think people, I think it gets proven by the 2019 reimagining, remake, whatever you want to call it, that this film's still like, and I remember it all, but being like, I can't believe they were brave enough to not just do that, but shoot it in a way that shows it. And we'll get into those specifics as we kind of obviously run through this story. Before that, though, quick run through of the cast and some interesting factoids, as it were. So, Del Midkiff as Lewis Creed, the main star of this film, alongside Fred Gwynne as Judd Crandall. Now, I'm going to stop there right away. I didn't know this until I rewatched it. And my wife goes, oh, Herman Munster. And I went, wait, what? I never knew before that Fred Gwynne was Herman Munster of the Munsters. And once I saw it, I could not see it. I couldn't believe I'd never noticed that before. I never watched the Munsters growing up, so I didn't really have that connection. But that blew my mind.
You know, like he's a strange one, Fred Gwynne, right? Because I don't know if it's just his face or something like that, but whenever I see Pet Sematary and I see his face, I feel like I've seen him a billion times in a billion films, but he's actually never done much. Like not like considering his age and all that, you know, like even just looking at his filmography, you know, there was a kind of good run between like 1985 and 1989 where he's got like 4 or 5 a year. And then that was it. Just knocked on the head a couple of years after that. Did a lot of TV shows for a while, obviously with the Monsters being one such TV show, but I didn't know that either. But weirdly, I don't know, like he's an iconic character in this film, like to a huge degree. So if I ever saw his face, even now as Herman Munster, I think I'd be the opposite way around. I'd be like, oh look, it's Judd.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
you're 100% right. And I almost want to say that without going too far into it, but I think it will occasionally have no choice but to touch on it. I got super excited when I saw who played Judd in the remake, because that guy is great. And at the end of that, I was like, nope. Fred Gwynne, that's Judd.
Yeah.
Yep. Denise Crosby as Rachel Goldman Creed. She's great in this as well. But the real star of this film, the real star is a 3-year-old. It's Miko Hughes as Gage Creed. I'll get more into it, but fucking hell, I have never seen a child actor perform quite like this. Blaise Berdal as Ellen Creed, Ellie. Brad Greenquist as Victor Pascal. Michael Lombard as Erwin Goldman. Susan Blomart as Missy Dandridge. Who else we got? Cavi Raz as Steve Masterson. Mary Louise Walton as Dory Goldman. Andrew Hobostek as Zelda Goldman. And Stephen King as Minister. That's the only ones. There was others, but they were the major ones. Yeah, we'll get to him and cameos. So the film was released April 21st, 1989, and gross. Check this, people. Bet we didn't know this. 89.5 million at the box office on a budget of 11.5. Whoa.
And you are going back a few years here, so money. That's some serious fucking sums there, isn't it?
Incredible. I couldn't believe it was that much, because I was like, nah, it's a Stephen King film. It no doubt either broke even or lost money, let alone made 8 times its budget. Incredible.
It is incredible.
Of course, if you do not know, a sequel, Pet Sematary 2, was released in 1992. And of course, as we've said, the second film adaptation in 2019. Pet Sematary 2 is going to be really difficult, because we're probably not going to touch upon it in this series unless we do like a small breakdown video, purely because it's not an adaptation of a King, so it doesn't quite fit. But it is a sequel to Pet Sematary, so it's kind of like I almost want to touch upon it to a certain degree, because
it sucks so bad.
I know, like, do you know what I mean? Like that reason, because it sucks so fucking bad. So of course, as well, it should be noted this movie is directed by Mary Lambert, but was written by Stephen King. So that's another rare thing, having him actually write the screenplay for this movie. And that ties into a lot of the accuracies. He was also present on location for most of the shooting of the film. The area it was shot in was only 20 minutes away from his home in Bangor, Maine. And Stephen King had required the movie to be filmed in Maine and a screenplay to be followed rigorously as part of the deal for the rights for this story, which will explain a lot, but will also explain why some things just do not fit. But we'll get to those as well, I think. Initially, Paramount executives wanted a pair of twins to play the role of Gage, like those chosen to play Ellie, which was the more cost-effective option. However, Mary Lambert was very impressed with the 3-year-old Miko Hughes and noticed he had a natural talent, so she lobbied in his studio to accept that choice, and he did it all on his own. Your expectation that there would be more than one child? It's not. It's just that one kid doing this shit. What was different, though, was the cats. Because guess what's really hard to fucking train? Cats. They used 9 in the end. In particular, jumpers, snarlers, and a cuddlers. That's what they defined the cats were. So there were 9 cats for church, which it's a cat. I don't blame them for that.
Hey, you got to do what you got to do. The fact that they managed to get 9 cats through the whole film is pretty impressive, to be fair.
It should be noted as well that Foxtoad also says no cats were harmed during the filmmaking. It's like bollocks. When those cats were fucking around, you were right kicking their asses.
That's why they went through 9. They killed 8 of them.
I think this is a factor that most people know as well, of course, is the role of Zelda, which is obviously a famous character from this film. Rachel's terminal sister was actually played by a man. This comes about because Mary Lambert wanted Zelda and her scenes to actually frighten the audience. And after auditioning some younger girls for it, found that it just didn't work to really convey the terror that should come from Zelda. So Andrew Hobostek ended up being the role to give that something off about Zelda. It's something that when you know, you can see, but it does work in conjunction of the disease she suffers from. The character of Missy is actually the blending of two characters into one. And in the book, Missy does not commit suicide. In fact, the only characters that died prior to Gage's death are Pascal and Norma Crandall, Judd's wife, an element that is also left out of the movie. Stephen King, big fan of the Ramones, and referenced some of their songs in the novel Pet Sematary. In homage, of course, the Ramones wrote and performed the theme song Pet Sematary. You must have heard this at some point in your life. And if you want to hear it in the movie, closing credits is where you'll find it. I'll mention this because we do rock and metal, so fucking Ramones are going to get mentioned.
It's also the closing credit of the remake, if you watched the remake and not seen the original.
Yeah, I never got past it. I didn't. Credits came up. I was like, oh, that's the truck driver also in the movie is listening to Sheena is a Punk Rocker by the Ramones. So you've got that too, little reference there. So this factoid I'm mentioning purely because the screenplay had it, and it's something the remake touches upon more. And I have a real negative view on it. But the original screenplay featured the Wendigo, which, if you don't know, is a Native American demon. It is mentioned in the novel, but was ultimately cut from the film. Its presence is implied twice, though. In the first scene, when Lewis is walking through the woods at night and hears something large knock down a tree, and second, when Judd first takes Lewis to the Indian burial ground, there is some kind of loud crash deep in the forest, followed by a long, almost feminine howl, and Judd says that it's only a loon. And that's the subtle references to the idea of the Wendigo. Yeah. The original cut of the film delivered to Paramount executives was judged to be too long. So yes, this is a movie that has had cuts with a lot of excessive footage removed, but in an incredible ton of events for a studio, and it shows you how times have changed. They decided that the closing scene was too tame, and they requested it to be reshot to be more graphic. I was like, what? That's the other way around normally. The studio's like, no, too much. Dial it back. And of course, changes in the novel, there are a fair few. But this is one that just made me laugh because it's Stephen King all over. But if you don't know, and it is slightly implied in the movie, but Mary Lambert herself has said she wasn't able to convey it properly. In the novel, Ellie, the character of the young girl, is psychic because it's a Stephen King thing, and everyone's fucking psychic at some point or another.
Has to be. It's a vehicle for moving stories forward.
It is. If you ever play a Stephen King drinking game, psychic is one of the things that get you fucked. And last but not least, as already mentioned, Stephen King has a cameo on this, a pretty obvious one as well, like a really on-screen one. At around the 41st minute of the movie, he is the minister at the funeral. Thankfully, only gets like a brief line, so he can't cheese it up as he normally does. So before we get into the plot, we've kind of touched upon the enjoyment of this, but I guess I want to go backtrack towards the cast specifically. Mm-hmm. From everyone that you saw, in particularly the main cast,
yep.
What did you think overall of them, and what were your highlights? Who was the best actors and the worst for you?
Okay, so I did. This is quite a nice easy one for me, really, because even back to original days of watching Pet Sematary, I always had like uninformed but issues with like a couple of performances, right? So the people that I think do a really, really good job. Obviously, I think Judd is fantastic. Yep. I genuinely think, whatever his name is, Fred Gwynne, pulling off what he's trying to pull off, which is essentially this kind of old school, not quite hillbilly as such, but like country kind of traditionalist guy, not being too creepy, because I think that was the thing. Like, this dude ain't coming nowhere near my kids. Like, that's the thing that he could have become so quickly. But actually, he almost becomes he starts off like, I'm not too sure I trust this guy, but becomes almost like that grandfather figure. And I love the fact that, I thought his performance is brilliant. I do, genuinely. And I think he's a standout actor in the whole film across everybody for me. I do, obviously, Gage is a kid, so like what Gage has to do is done well. And he has probably one of my favorite moments in the film, which just every time I watch it, I love it, which is just the no fair bit right at the end when he's like, oh, no fair. Like, oh, that's wonderful.
That is incredible. Yeah.
I also actually think that Dale Midkiff as Lewis does a decent job. There are times when I find him frustrating, but I find him frustrating because his character is doing things that I'm just like, what are you doing? Not that he's pulling it off badly. And sometimes the fact that I guess if I'm buying in enough to be challenging the character, it usually means that the actor's doing enough of the job that I'm seeing him as Lewis and I'm not seeing him as someone playing Lewis.
Yeah, okay.
Rachel,
Yep.
Denise Crosby, who plays Rachel. I fucking hate her performance in this.
Really?
I don't think she's a bad actress or anything like that. I don't think it's that, but and maybe it's because she's a good actress that I hate the performance of it. But in every version of Pet Sematary that I've ever seen, Rachel in this original movie is like just a bit of a pointless bitch. I always found that she's there and her stories are important and everything like that. But actually, if you took Rachel and Zelda out of the film, they are a subplot.
Yep.
That's the thing. She's not important, and that's why she can go away and be the comeback person and all sorts of stuff. In a weird way, it's Lewis's story more so than anything else. I find her in this film, and again, maybe this is not the acting performance. Maybe I'm mixing this up with the character, but I find her to be like a cold and pretty like emotionless kind of wife. Like she'd do my nut in, man. To be honest with you, you know what I mean? Like which I find her character really weird, and I didn't like watching her on screen. So, you know, and again, not because she does anything particularly bad, but I always thought like because it's a kid, like you feel bad saying it about a kid, but the girl who plays Ellie.
Yep.
Blaze, first cool name by the way, who plays Ellie, because she's a child, she throws so much enthusiasm into some of the lines she's doing that her face essentially does like gurning faces and stuff while she's saying it, and it's just kind of like, oh man, like tone it down a bit, like do you know what I mean? But I mean, I don't think anyone's terrible, like as in there's nobody that I'm watching in this film that makes me go like, oh, I couldn't watch this again because I can't watch that person. I just think that Judd sets the bar extremely high. I think Lewis and Gage hit the bar. I think everyone else struggles to get to the bar.
Interesting. So we got a different view on some of these, quite a different view in particular too. So I second everything you said about Fred Gwynne. Ultimately, when you think of Pet Sematary, folks, those iconic lines, they're being spoken by him, the things he says. This is a place where the dead talk, that is a place the dead walk, all stuff like that. No, that's not from, that's from Pascal, but he said this is the place where the dead talk to Ellie early on in the film. It's that demeanor. He's very likable, very lovable, and without spending too much time with him, the film actually conveys what you said, this grandfatherly feel as it goes on, but also a man of regret later on, particularly when he realizes the mistake he made by introducing Lewis to the thing. I think he really turns it up there as his own personal regret. Where we differ is with Dale Midkiff. I had a lot of issues. This is probably where biggest issues I had in the film. Whereas I thought, other than some good facial expressions, I thought some of his line delivery was down. I'd be like, that was awful. And sometimes it's not his fault. Sometimes it's who he's playing off. And I guess you can only ask so much of an actor. So, for example, when he has to react to Pascal as a ghost, that's why I found he seemed to struggle the most, where he almost didn't know where to look and how to react to what was probably just a disembodied voice, someone standing over there speaking, when it was you're focusing on his ghostly figure here and stuff like that. The same goes with him and Ellie. There's a scene, and you kind of mentioned about Gurning, that I really didn't like, where she talks about God taking, God don't take church and all that aspect. That I thought was one of the worst scenes in the movie. And I thought, God, there's nothing convincing about that from both of them. They seem to really, really struggle. But then he has moments, and like, I'm going to jump ahead, but when Gage dies, that roar he gives out, that was fucking amazing. Like that, I believed that was amazing. And his facial expressions that follow that, his dead eyes almost, and stuff like that. But then I contrast that to the very end of the film when he's walking with Rachel's body, and I'm like, just coming across poor like that. I think
he just didn't like Rachel either.
Well, here's the thing. I think Rachel's one of the best in it. I think, Denise Crosby. And it's weird when you said about like unlikable. A scene shot in my head that I really like. So her and Lewis have a fight early morning, and it's a really good one where he's made to promise that Church won't die. she makes him promise, and he gets really annoyed about that. And I completely understood. I was like, what the fuck? Don't put me in that situation. Anyway, he goes outside and she follows him, and she just kind of looks at him really like nicely and says, still friends, Doc. And they smile and they kiss. I really like that scene. I thought it was really sweet. And I kind of got the chemistry there as well. The problem is you're right. She kind of gets sidelined later on by needing to exit the movie to go somewhere else so Lewis could do the events of what will occur the latter portion of the movie. And that ultimately sidelines her to position into this, as you said, this subplot, this strange subplot, ultimately, when you think about it, of the Zelda aspect and stuff like that.
Yep.
But I do think it's like way she retells that story and how we experience in flashbacks. I really, really enjoyed that as well. Plus, she also screams so fucking strongly when she gets killed. I really like that as well. So I'm a big fan of her in this.
She died well.
Just the sound of her screams were really horrifying.
Yeah.
Around that, Brad Greenquist as Pascal is a very confusing character for me. I have a big dispute over the fact that I blame this man for setting the events of this movie in motion. I blame him completely because something happens early on that I never noticed when I was younger, but I realized, wait a minute, if he didn't do that, that may not have ever happened. And when we get to that, I'll explain what my issue with this that is.
Mm-hmm.
The other one I want to really praise, but only because I think she does the role really well, even though I think it's so fucking pointless, is Susan Blomart as Missy Dandridge. This is a character from the book more than anything else. It's a combination of two, but is jammed in this movie for reasons I do not understand in the slightest, because you could cut everything out of the movie. In fact, in the 2019, she's gone completely, and you wouldn't miss a thing. Wouldn't miss a thing. But it seems to be designed just to make the movie have a darker scene more than anything else. And I mean, you go, well, that's really horrible. And a build towards the idea of death for Ellie. But in the scene she's in, she basically appears to be suffering from some sort of debilitating stomach disease or issue. I kind of presumed she was suffering from stomach cancer. And God, she's really good at getting that across. Like the hunched over body, the fact that the way she talks to the doctor, her matter of fact talking about like snipping the balls off. I found she was so fucking good in that kind of country woman life that speaks straight up, but also refuses help from a doctor as well because she don't need out, it passes, all that stuff. Thought she was great.
Yeah, I agree. I think in the book, if I remember correctly, that Missy Dandridge has a little bit more backstory to her, but not much. But in the same area as Missy is being discussed in the book,
right?
There are also a couple of other characters in the town that are also detailed.
Yep.
I think the purpose of it from the book perspective, and maybe it's why King wanted to keep one of them in there or something, was to try and give the idea that this whole area, this whole town was under the influence of this Wendigo, of this ancient tribe as well. So it was a bad place.
Yep.
As such, and look at this person suffering, and this person suffering, this person suffering, and look at this wholesome family who've just moved here. Now let's get to work.
That step that you can go to in a book. So I've read the book as well, and I didn't have time to reread it for this, but enough familiarity and a quick synopsis read to fix that. How well do you remember it, and how well can you compare the two between?
Pretty well, I think. Pretty well. It has been a while, but I think I still remember it pretty well.
So from my understanding is, and my memory, that this is a pretty decent adaptation of the main story. Now, a lot of that obviously comes
it is, yes,
screenplay.
But I also it's kind of, this is hard, right, to criticize as an adaptation because of who wrote the screenplay. I mean, King wrote the book, King wrote the screenplay, so of course it's good. I always wondered what was cut out, because I do think that I think it is a very good adaptation. Don't get me wrong. I think it's very, very true to the story. Yep. But because of what always happens, right? Book to film. They even said, like in what you said at the beginning, that it was too long. Elements had to be cut. Yep. What was cut? Because I think that there are some massive missing factors that actually make the book make sense, or as much sense as sort of sci-fi and horror can be.
Yep.
And I wonder if they were cut from the film.
Yeah.
Like the Wendigo thing. The Wendigo thing is huge, because otherwise it's just there's a fucking bit of ground there that if you bury shit in it, that comes back to life. There's no reasoning. It's all lost. And you're right that they subtly hint at it, but you'd have to know the book to pick up on a hint.
Of course.
Otherwise, it just meant nothing. You might just be like, oh, it's a loom. Okay, fair enough.
Well, no, I think when it happened, I was evil spirit more than anything fucking else kind of thing. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to get stuck in a Wendigo part in this one. The reason being is because that will become a more prevalent aspect in the remake, and I think that's where we can really kind of fight into that. But you're right. I think this adaptation is different to a lot of the other stuff we will end up covering, different to 1408 and stuff like that, purely because King wrote the fucking screenplay. So as you say, what one aspect I wonder was cut was more detail around Pascal. Pascal in particular would have been something that I definitely think's probably got trimmed out here.
I find the whole Pascal thing quite strange because he's obviously pivotal in the film.
Yep.
Because again, he's used as a vehicle to almost be like a narrator.
Yep.
As such, like for us.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what he's for. I think it was almost like, we can't give you all the detail here. We can use Pascal as the filling gaps in, oh, don't go there because this happens there. Now we know, oh, right, that's what that does. And it meant that you could almost like move the story along with the use of Pascal. Pascal is very fondly remembered from this film, like by fans.
Yep.
Like I think Pascal was actually on the original cover of the movie.
He is, the top of his head in the the church at the bottom, the pet cemetery in the middle, Pascal at the top.
Which is kind of strange because as much as I enjoy, I guess I don't know if I enjoy it or not, but okay, his purpose in the film's fine. I've got no problem with it. He's certainly not like front cover, like star of the movie to me. Like, do you know what I mean? I could never really understand, like, firstly, why everyone's like, fucking Pascal, mate. Like, do you know what I mean? Pascal's on the cover. He's in it about 3 fucking times. And some of those times are some of the most uncomfortable bits of watching, especially the last time he proper appears in the movie when he's talking with Lewis. And that is a horrific scene. It's really bad. And the one before, I want to say also the one before that, because near the end of the movie he becomes so surplus requirements, they were like, oh, put him in. And you're right, that last scene with Lewis, but before that, when he's in the truck with Rachel, and I cringed when he said, and I also got a massive problem with that as well, about an aspect of the story there. But we're going to go through it in kind of quick format, dropping moments where we're going to criticize, praise, whatever, and stuff like that. So if you don't know, the Creed family, Lewis, Rachel, the children, Ellie and Gage, and their pet cat, Church, moved from Chicago to rural Ludlow, Maine, after Lewis accepts a job as a physician with the University of Maine. Information that's thrown at you super, super quick, coming after the opening credits, a set of opening credits that I'm going to mention because I had forgotten this existed, and I groaned so fucking hard because it was, I was like, no, don't do Children of the Corn, la, 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 not that shit. I hate that stuff. Neighbor, friend, and neighbor. Judd Crandall, who takes them to the isolated pet cemetery, which is misspelled as cemetery with an S. That's a very important aspect here, in the forest behind the Creed's new home. So let's stop here and talk about that pet cemetery and how it looks. I want to absolutely praise this incredible look, design, and thought behind it, because not only does it have this creepy factor that any cemetery does have, but what I really admired was the fact that they went out of the way to go, look, we are not trying to make this scary. We wanted to have a creep factor of the quiet of a cemetery, but it's really well lit. It's in a lovely location with the sun dappling down. They wanted that to still look like a place of peace. You don't go there to be scared, but it will still creep you out, because that then creates a juxtaposition with what's beyond it. That is something, without getting too much of it, that a remake would not do well. But this, I was so impressed by the location. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I love the subtlety of it as well. It's all just a little path. Look at that nice little path. Wonder where that leads. And that's that little intrigue, isn't it? That's what piques your interest, because we know that any human being standing in that spot right there, and you see a path, you got to follow it. Like, you got to go down that path one day. And I love the fact that they don't try and shove anything in your face. It just, there's the path. It leads to a place, and that's all you're going to get at the beginning of it. Yeah. We get a little bit of ominousness when it focuses on what is a dead. It's called a deadfall. A deadfall is effectively, it's like a waterfall, so to speak, of dead branches and stuff like that. That's where the trouble is going to come from. We then kind of smash cut, and we hard cut, man, to Lewis at work and a jogger
being brought in. This is Victor Pascal, the character we talked a bit about, and he basically is dead, pretty much. His brain's fucking hanging out of his head. And this is where I was always a bit confused, because it does a terrible job of explaining what actually happened to this dude. Now, at no point did it say he's a jogger in the movie. You just get that from his outfit, and I get that from IMDb more than anything else. Also, does a terrible job, other than some nurse is quickly saying, "Oh, you get hit by a truck." You would never know that. You would never know that. Now, knowing that, of course, that ties into the main story that the Creed's house happens to be on a road that trucks bomb down. Absolutely bomb down.
And we're not talking like, oh, these trucks go pretty fast down this road. These drivers are fucking lunatics.
Lunatics. Let's stop there, because I have a problem with that. And what really bugs me is, and I realize picking apart is a story. So what, you've got to tell a story. But I'm like, has no one ever in this town gone, right, we need to put up a slow sign, a stop sign, a speed limit sign to slow these drivers down? Nope.
Speed bump. No police.
Just let it carry on.
The one that always gets me, and I don't know if it's like still now, but you see it a lot in like kind of old American movies as well. There's like, when you put a little fucking fence up around your front garden, stop your kid running out on the road. It never made sense to me. It was like, oh, look at our big open garden where the kids can literally walk straight out in front of trucks but very, very large trucks going at a hyper speed. We put a fucking fence up. That's what most people do with their front gardens.
Absolutely, because early on when they're first there, they do a thing where it suggests Gage could be hit by a truck, but he gets stopped beforehand. But enough time passes later in the film that we will end up at Thanksgiving that you're like, so you didn't learn from that and think, okay, right, over the next couple of months, I'm going to make sure I put a fence up. No, it didn't. But you're going back to Victor Pascal. He's in a mess. The effect is quite nice. It is quite gross looking. The sort of exposed skull and stuff like that. But before he dies, he grabs Lewis's arm and starts talking about not going to the place beyond, and he calls Lewis's name, and Lewis is all like, "How do you know my name?" And that's a good scene. That's a good scene. Yeah. But that night, Pascal then appears to Lewis as a ghost, and the effect is it's good enough. It's not terrible. It's not great. It works in the context of the film. But this is where my biggest problem with the film comes from, is this entire set of events didn't need to happen. So he leads into the pet cemetery, and I do like the walk down the path in the dark with the mist. I think that's another like juxtaposition, because earlier on we see it in the day and it looks quite nice. Night with the mist, scary. Yeah. He takes them over to where the barrier is, the deadfall is, and says, don't cross that barrier because the ground beyond is sour. Really big fan of that terminology. The ground is sour. That gets your imagination going. Love that.
Yep.
We kind of see like a blue glow from the deadfall. So my issue is this. Why did you show him that, Pascal? Why did you even tell him anything was beyond?
Yep.
If you'd never mentioned and never appeared to him as a ghost, would he ever have gone? Would he have ever known?
Well, I think he would have. But that's one of my problems with the film that we'll get to shortly.
Yeah, I think I know what you're coming to, but we'll get to that. But certainly, I feel like you really didn't have to put the thoughts in his fucking head at all.
That's what we were saying, though. Like, Victor was like, he was a pointless character other than a way to move the story on, because what they needed in the book and in the film was, right, how do we make Lewis go there?
Yep.
Right, so it's all well and good that he's there and all that now. He can walk down the path. He can see the pet cemetery part of that. How do we make him go further? We need something to make him go further.
Yep.
Oh, how about we have a ghost town?
Yeah.
That sounds like King.
Yeah, a psychic ghost as well.
Yeah.
There is a great scene though when Lewis wakes up in bed the next morning. Of course, it was a dream, but then he pulls the sheets off to see his feet are covered in dirt. Big fan of that. Love that. Really clever little bit of storytelling.
Yeah. My only issue with that is that, like, he should be freaked the fuck out, man, to wake up and be like, oh my God, I'm covered in dirt and the sheets are all dirty. He kind of goes like, oh, and then pops them all down like a laundry chute.
Yep, that's the
bad. Just carries on with his day, and it's like, are you not more bothered about this?
It is sort of just dismissed and put to the side, you know?
Like, oh, I've been walking in the woods in the sleep where I saw a ghost. How crazy is that? Anyway, off to work.
Because even if you thought you were sleepwalking, you'd be like, that was a dangerous sleepwalk. There are trucks bombing down the fucking road and I'm sleepwalking that far.
I'd be really bothered if I had a dream where I was walking in the woods and I woke up and my bed was covered in dirt and leaves. I would probably take a moment
Yeah,
I'd sit
yeah.
there stroking my beard, thinking, "What's going on here?" I wouldn't just go, "Oh, cool." Anyway, off to work.
Yeah. We then kind of fast forward to Thanksgiving. The family is gone to stay with Rachel's parents. We should note there is this storyline that Rachel's parents do not like. Forgotten his name. Dale.
Lewis.
Lewis. Fuck knows why. The movie never elaborates on it at all. No idea.
They touch on it more in the remake actually, and in the book. They don't go heavily on it in the book either, but they kind of give you hints that like he might be in there either a bit of a waster and like he's actually moved there because he got evicted from his house and lost his job and all this sort of stuff. So
position, man, he's doing all right for himself. Fucking hell. What judge? What more do they want from him? But through this, anyway, while they're away, Church is run down on the highway. They're all, him and Judd are worried that Ellie will be upset, and this is where Judd decides to take Lewis beyond the pet cemetery and deep into the woods where they reach an ancient. It's referred to as Micmac burial ground. So an ancient Indian burial ground as well. It's a lot of information just thrown in there, but I don't want to stay too long on these particular stories. There's elements I like in this. I love the kind of noise and where Church is pulled up off the ground where he's frozen to it.
Yeah,
I really like that. It was really kind of gross.
Yeah, there's some cool moments in this whole scene. I quite like the kind of camaraderie between Judd and Lewis as they kind of climb over the branches and Lewis falls and stuff like that. Again, there are errors in it though. Like Lewis carries what would be probably a 12 to kilo cat around in that bin bag like he's carrying a feather. Like it's just swinging about behind him, like one hand climbing up over branches, falls off, bag's still there, picks it up, carries on. Like that thing would have been harder to carry.
Yeah, no, I agree as well. He's got like pickaxe as well and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a fair bit of equipment. I also don't like the fact that Judd makes a big deal about, I know where to stand in the dead fall and all that. When you watch them go up it, it's almost like there's a bit of a path up until the point where Lewis puts a foot wrong. But I was like,
yeah. Also, he's a bit of a dick about it as well, Judd. He kind of goes, I know where to stand, and then he's off.
Yeah.
Like, Lewis is still down the bottom. It's like, you're not going to help him then. I know where to stand later.
But one thing it does really, really, really well is it does get the sense of distance. Because what I quite enjoyed was the fact that the Micmac burial ground isn't like, there's the pet cemetery, there's the deadfall, there's the Indian burial ground. It's not. It's a big distance away, including what seems like some fucking stage climbing a goddamn mountain. Like, really like that. And of course, the actual burial site. Yeah, I liked it. I like the look of it.
Yeah.
Judd there instructs Lewis to bury the cat and gets out of helping by saying, nah, mate, you got to do it on your own. Sits down and smokes. Because this isn't like mud and grass. This is stone, man.
Yeah.
When they do it, I love this scene. This is one of the best scenes between Lewis and Judd. As after he's buried the cat, he stops and he just looks at Judd and says, what did we do here tonight, Judd? And Judd's just like, don't tell him about this. And that's it. He goes, we buried your cat. Buried your cat. Like, and like, it isn't answering the question at all. No, what he's asking is, why the fuck did we come all the way here? Like, I love that. Yeah. And it's like, okay, he just stops asking questions because he's like, whatever, man, I'm tired, all that. There must be a reason. I guess I'll find out. That's a really good scene between them. But of course, the whole point of this burial site is that it reanimates the dead. And a reanimated Church returns to the house, but he's a bit stinky. He moves sluggish. He's also quite vicious. Lewis noticed this first more than anything else. To get this across, they use... it's actually not an effect. It's something you're able to do with glass and all that, and to do with a natural cat's eyes, but the glowing eyes to give Church are good. But one of the 9 cats they use, the hisser, yeah, he's a little bastard. He comes across like a git.
They've obviously at this stage as well, it is just Lewis, isn't it? Because I think Rachel and Ellie are away, obviously, at this stage. So Lewis is dealing with all of this. He gets some nice little scratches and stuff.
He does. He always gets that lovely little scene where a mouse gets chucked in the bath with him, isn't it?
Yeah, it's real odd, that one. That's an odd one because, like, animals don't tend to... The idea of them bringing you a mouse or a rat or whatever is like a gift. They do it because they like you. And that kind of, like, that's quite an odd thing. It's like, it doesn't come along, hey, I've hunted a rat down or a mouse down. You can have it. It's normally done through love. So actually, it kind of doesn't make any sense in the context of the story.
Well, I
other
think
than
the
to
impression
make
was
it.
being a dick ruining the bath.
Well, yeah, which gives it quite human characteristics, then, doesn't it? Which is like,
Yeah, you're not wrong, actually. It is a bit more human like. Yeah, that was a specific thing I wanted to do. During this period as well, we should point out that this is when Missy has had her run of scenes, including hanging herself. It is a particularly cold and dark scene. I would have felt more had I seen more, understood the character, but I always feel a little uncomfortable with a suicide like that.
yeah,
That is based in one of suffering. It's not very nice, and I almost wish it wasn't in the movie.
yeah, it's got a nice little moment in it with the note, where
Yeah.
a shaky hand writes the note, which just very briefly flashes up on the screen, just basically saying, oh, I can't remember even what it says. Oh no, I'm getting. But anyway, like, and then she stands on the edge of the chair. I also really appreciated the way that they, not the chair, it's like a table, and she kind of shuffles forward, and then you see her feet on the end of it, and the camera is like front and center on those feet as her feet kind of slip almost off the end of it, and the table kicks back. And yeah, it's an uncomfortable watch, even though, like, yeah, I agree, like, you don't necessarily understand why she's there and why we're watching her kill herself, but I still think it's dealt with well.
I think
like, filmed well.
Yeah, I think it is too. It stays with me amongst many other scenes in this. It stays with me. So Judd ends up talking with Lewis and explaining that, basically explaining what the in your burial ground is to a certain degree, and that he revived his own pet dog many, many years before this when he was a very young kid. And that dog came back and was a bit of a wild animal as well. And he'd kind of hoped that the cat, being a different kind of beast, would be different. And the idea was to save Ellie from the grief. It's all believable enough. I wasn't 100% convinced, because later he will tell even another part of that story that was
really like my point. Like, like how you were saying, if Victor never tells him to go there, then nothing happens. And to me, by the end of the film, having seen more of Judd's flashbacks and past, I can't for the life of me think how he ever felt burying that cat there was a good idea. I really don't. I mean, he walks him through the pet cemetery. I like it. The geezer hasn't learned his lesson by now. This is mental. So a lot of it, I look back at it as like Judd, man, seriously, you literally kicked all of these events off of everything that you knew. Did you really think the best thing that he should do was to bury that cat there?
Because even if, like, Lewis somehow one day in his entire life ended up stumbling somehow across that, you would never fucking think of burying something there. You never would.
No, you've got a pet cemetery right beside you.
Yep. But of course, then eventually the family come back and we lead to the big scene. Of course, the trucks are pounding down, and in a terrible moment of bad parenting, by not building a fence, arranging for slow signs down, or maybe speaking to the company in question about telling your truckers to take that road a bit quieter, Gage ends up getting killed and run over by a truck. This is arguably one of the best scenes in the movie, because I think, good God, you were brave for this. Because it does it brilliantly, to the point where the truck driver sees Gage at the last minute in the road. The filming of that is incredible. Tries to brake. Obviously, you don't see the kid being splattered, but what you do fucking get is a bloody shoe flying in the air.
Just one rolls down the road a bit.
I was like, the
whole scene is phenomenal, right? Because what they then do is obviously the grief moment, but they do first, and I love it when people do this for grief moments, is they go silent.
Yep.
So actually, at first of it, it's pure silence. You hear nothing. You can see the looks on their faces and screams, and it goes completely silent until Lewis comes back in with that roar.
Yep.
And then there's a very brief kind of almost like flashback but photograph sort of moment before it goes into the next scene, and it's just like, that was nicely done, man.
It is generally goosebumps moment of the scene. It's one of the best acted, well shot. It's incredible, and it's horrible, because that fucking kid up to this point has been nothing but cute. He really is a good actor. He's cute. There's a fun scene earlier on when I can't remember what he does, but he bangs into Lewis and goes, "Uh-oh." like stuff like, it's just cute shit.
Even just to build up to that scene with the kite. It's cute with him and Lewis, and they're playing with the kite, and then he drops it and he does another one of his uh-ohs, and that's where it all kind of leads from, isn't it? As the kite starts moving away, he follows. while
Yeah.
while the family are drinking beer and completely ignoring the child that's behind them.
Oh, it's amazing. We often I thought was sort of flash up. We cut to Lewis in grief sitting at the table. John is trying to talk to him and also basically kind of getting the impression that shit, Lewis might have ideas here and kind of tries to warn him off it. You know, Lewis is all, I ain't going to do that shit. Not quite like that, but like, yeah, he's not going to do that. But he also, Judd believes that kind of like by introducing Lewis to it, he kind of awoke the forces in that ancient ground. And that's kind of ties into what killed Gage. I didn't love that because I was kind of like, no, that needs development. If you're going to do that angle and say it's a force that can then influence the town and the people around it, I want to see that angle pushed a bit more. Basically, I want to see a bit longer.
That's the whole thing from the book. That is the whole Wendigo thing. It is about the influence on the town. It's a dark town, and what the Wendigo does is it feeds off grief and it compels people to come and bury things.
Yep.
It's an influencer.
It
makes no sense.
No, it doesn't. That's the biggest problem. It doesn't make sense. And you kind of like, okay, it's fine. You can just buy into evil force because that's what you want to use. And we're doing a movie and move on from that. But this is where he then proceeds to, Judd tells the story of a local man, Bill Bateman, who buried his son, Timmy, in the ground after he was killed in World War II. But Timmy returned as a bit of a nasty zombie-esque thing, which eventually led to a posse of men setting fire to the Bateman house, killing Bill and his son. Now we see this sequence of events in flashback, and what really I really liked it, but I was really getting hammered by what I felt like was, well, give me a moment to breathe, film. You've just killed Gage. Now you're doing this flashback of a series of horrible events with some very gory visuals of the ripping his face apart, and then like the burning of the house where the father dies with his son. Like you're just like, whoa. Oh, you're killing me, film. Yeah. I did like it though. I did like it. It's the kind of depth we do need in this movie.
Yeah, it's a strange pacing, I guess, sometimes in the film, isn't it? Because on one hand of it, I really enjoy the fact that actually it's quite subtle at the beginning. Like you're almost halfway through this movie before Gage gets stretched across the motorway. Or killed. That's like halfway through, and obviously there are moments before it that are important in terms of the story, but that's like the pivotal scene there. That's where the film transforms and everything happens. And it's nearly halfway through. But then, and there's so much still to come, and it's now jam-packed into half. And while it's good, I enjoyed the fact that it was subtle at the beginning, because actually that would be what I expect from King, trying to make a film like a book, because that's how a book would be. It would take time to develop the characters and all that sort of stuff bit by bit to make you care about it before. Ain't gonna just kill Gage at the beginning. No one's gonna give a fuck. You got to make it matter. But then, because I would imagine either from cuts or from things that King couldn't do in film, whatever it was, they didn't really give everyone the depth that was needed anyway. Like some of them did, so you cared. But like, in the book version of it, again, you are talking like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of character detail but not just about the 4 or 5 key characters. You're talking about the town, about secondary people, and so then the whole thing matters. So yeah, I do completely get it. Like, I'm like halfway through, it's paced at a certain steady thing, and then it's like Gage is dead, and it's like, fucking have it. We're going.
We were cruising before, and now the foot's down, and we're absolutely fucking racing down the motorway. Absolutely, because it really does kind of fly from here as well. Now, you will, if you know the story, you're probably wondering why we've not talked about several scenes that are intercut up to this point. The reason being is because when we get to the big part of that story, we're going to touch upon the entire angle. We'll touch upon Zelda in a minute, don't worry. But after the funeral, Rachel and Ellie leave for Chicago with Lewis remaining at home. This week is Stephen King cameo. We also get probably what is unnecessary, which is this weird conflict between the father, including this really dark scene where you're like, do we need that extra layer of darkness where they fight at the funeral? Gage's coffin is knocked off. It opens partially to show his dead arm. I'm like, fucking hell, film. Give me a break. It really is. And but what's annoying is a bit later on is like, that's kind of like the father even tries to make amends after that. And I'm like, again, there's where you've been cutting. That feels like it needs a lot more for me to get to this caring stage.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, Lewis says he's staying home because the idea is that he's tying up loose ends, and obviously they're going to leave the town and move back to Chicago. I mean, you can't blame him for that. You ain't staying in that house. God, no. God, no. But actually, he's got a plan, and unsurprisingly, he's planning to exhume his son's body and bury him. Pascal tries to warn him. Judd even tries to stop him, but it all comes to nothing because Lewis sneaks into the cemetery and digs up his son. Now, for going so fast, the film grinds to a halt here. And I was not a fan of this scene because it takes forever. We see him sneaking in. We see him sitting in front of the grave. We see him talking to the grave. We see him digging the grave. We see him then exhuming the body, then talking to what is obviously a dummy in his arms. And this is where he's not great acting. This is where I'm kind of like, oh, this is crap, this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, see, I didn't mind it. I wouldn't. I'm not like sitting here thinking like it's Oscar kind of level performances or anything like that. But I didn't notice it as bad acting. I was okay with the scenes.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Maybe it was just me kind of slowed it down after suddenly pacing up as well. But then in Chicago, we get this kind of thing where apparently Ellie is dreaming and Pascal is visiting her to try and warn her that Lewis is about to do something terrible. And this, I was like, what? What does he think the kid's going to do? What does he fucking think telling her is going to do anything?
Nah, it doesn't make any sense, does it? Yeah, like you need something to happen. Let's tell an 8 or 9 year old hysterical child who's just lost a brother because she'll be rational, you know.
Yeah, it really is, but it does disturb Rachel enough, and particularly when she puts the link together of the name, because Lewis had mentioned a name to her before, so she ends up calling Judd, but he looks out his window and says, well, Lewis isn't home, but she's still freaked out and worried, so she decides to return to Maine against Judd's wishes. He's kind of like, oh, I'll look into it and stuff like that. Okay, we're not going to get there yet, but we are going to focus on the Chicago house because this house has some of the most unnerving oil paintings on the fucking wall.
Yeah.
What the fuck was with that massive one of Zelda and the cat?
Yeah.
Horrible.
It's an odd place, man. They're even like just all of them, because actually there's a scene, I think, that when they're coming down the stairs or just through a hallway or whatever, and nothing in the house is normal. Like there are paintings with like squashed up looking people, and it just doesn't sort of make any sense.
Yeah, it's really fucking weird.
I don't understand why they're there. They don't look like humans as such.
They look like bad paintings.
Yeah, and maybe that's what it was. It was like, oh, we need to put some shit in this house here to make it look like a set, and someone was just like grabbing paintings from a charity shop or something.
And the kids draw them.
Yeah.
Judd had tried to stay awake outside his house to keep an eye on Lewis, but he falls asleep, allowing Lewis to kind of sneak in and around. And back home, he's visited by the reanimated Gage. But they don't meet first. We basically see it almost like a POV from Gage as Lewis has fallen asleep, and we see him going into his bag and pulling out a scalpel, and you're already like, this is going to be mean. This is going to be nasty. But it's Judd he targets first. As he makes himself known to Judd with his laugh and kind of taunts Judd. Judd's looking around for him. But I do love the fact that Judd isn't taking it lightly. He pulls a gun out. Like he knows this is bad news.
I'm going to blow your head off, you little prick.
Yeah, it really, really is. But of course, if you know the movie, you know this is one of the most violent deaths. He gets his Achilles tendon slashed, his mouth cut open before Gage bites in his throat, killing him. Of course, people worried and were confused, particularly as regards to like, well, you can't do this for a 3-year-old. This is quite traumatizing. It's not what you think. It's shot in a very special way. This kid was never doing a lot of these actions. The scalpel he is holding when he is him is completely and utterly blunt. Shots of where he's biting the neck and stuff like that. That's not that kid. It's not the kid at all. Dummies were used. Smart shooting techniques were used. You can tell if you watch the cuts. There are more obviously bad ones later on involving a dummy. Ooh, yeah, we'll get to that. But for the most part, this was just shot really, really cleverly to always look like the kid was involved when he was not even there. Love that. Yeah. Because it convinced me. I was like, that fucking kid's biting his throat. What a prick.
Not cute anymore now, is he?
No. Rachel ends up getting home and is actually lured into Judd's house by what she thinks is Gage, but eventually going to reveal to be the spectre of her dead sister, Zelda. So, right, here we go. Right, let's just touch upon the entire angle that we've avoided throughout the movie. She starts to have visions or memories of her sick younger sister who suffered from spinal meningitis and was kept in the attic by her parents like some sort of dirty secret, suffering in pain. She tells this story eventually to Lewis, who didn't know the full details. That's a reason why he ends up adding to his dislike of her father. But seemingly the more the spirit, I guess the dark spirit awakens, the more these memories come back to Rachel. She starts to have visions of Zelda. I guess the question is, what do you make of Zelda overall?
I think the scenes that are like the whole story arc that they have with that thing is disturbing, and the scenes are good, and the twisting spine and everything, looks fantastic. And obviously the fact that they filmed with a guy, it does work. Like, it makes it more frightening. I've kind of like always been torn between it, because on one hand of it, it doesn't have a direct impact on the film. It's similar to the Miss Dandridge stuff in that it's a subplot, really. It didn't. Then the other hand of it is that I guess maybe the subplot exists so that they could bring her back, for this scene, like at the end. But I don't know. It was difficult for me. I found it difficult to care, because like I think I was meant to care more. Like in the film, like I was meant to care about the fact that her parents were dicks. I was meant to care about the fact that they used to like leave her to look after, this person. I don't think, I wasn't, you obviously she tries to kind of like push you down the idea that she was a bad person and all that, but she wasn't. She was as much a neglected child as the rest of that family were. But the problem is because I didn't really care for Rachel. I saw her as an interference in the plot. So then when they tried to expand on her stuff, I think I maybe would have cared more about this story if it had come earlier.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
I think it's like while I was learning about the rest of the family and they're just moving in, and I can tell there's tension between her and Lewis, and then they give it to me there, then maybe I care about Rachel more throughout the film. And then when Zelda comes back, it's more impactful. But here it was like I didn't like Rachel up to here. I found her to be quite a cold and pretty heartless bitch for the most part. And also considering she was neglected as a child, not particularly great at looking after her own children, seeing as like Gage probably should have been dead a couple of times if it wasn't actually for the fact that Judd kept dragging him out of the fucking road. And even that time when he does die, it's Judd who notices.
Yeah, he's the first one to notice. Lewis stopped the kid.
Yeah. So like, basically all her kids would have probably been dead by now. You think maybe after her pass, she might be a little bit more attentive of her own fucking children to not repeat the mistakes of, those past. But yeah, like I said, I think it's almost like by that point, everything's kicking off now. Lewis, it's all going off with Gage. Judd's dead. Lewis is about to come back into the story, and it's then a diversion into this stuff to make me quickly care about her now because we're about to do some shit to her.
Fair point. Now, I think you've got some strong points. I think people tend to get stuck on this angle because of the creepy factor that Zelda portrays and that aspect. And often when people talk about Pet Sematary, like, oh yeah, Zelda's so scary. Now, I always believed that too. And on a rewatch, there is an early scene involving Zelda when Rachel is first telling the story to Lewis that I think is the most terrifying part, which is when she's trying to feed her gruel or the porridge in bed. Because that, to me, is the reason why I find it terrifying, is because that's just an innocent person suffering, and that, like, she could have been helped way better than this. And it's just, it's sad almost to a degree. I feel sorry for the person who's in suffering and pain. Where the film, and I'm like, really? People remember this being scary, is here, when she comes back towards Rachel. And suddenly she's this cackling, I'll break your back. Ha, 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 ha. And I thought it was so cheesy. I was like, that ain't scary. That's stupid. That is stupid. So for me, I think it's one of those that people use nostalgia to kind of remember it perhaps stronger than it is.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think you're 100% right, though. Remove it from the plot. We ain't missing it. We ain't missing it. It doesn't add anything developed to the characters beyond giving Rachel this angle to keep her busy for a period. It doesn't develop the fact that the parents, because the parents are barely fucking in it. That aspect, it doesn't do any of that. It doesn't work. I don't see how it ties into the overall plot either regarding Gage and all that, because you say, oh, she felt guilty. Because the thing is, she feels guilty because she wished for Zelda to be dead, and Zelda eventually choked to death when she was younger and stuff like that. How does that work in relation to the overall pet? What does that matter? What does guilt matter? Guilt's got nothing to fucking do with it. It's a reanimating corpse.
Yep. It's a complete sidestep.
Particularly as ultimately that vision transitions to Gage standing before Rachel, and for some reason wearing the extremely odd outfit of a top hat and some sort of funeral dress. I was like, what the fuck happened there? Now, he's supposed to look like the painting, but I didn't get why.
Okay, I never really clocked they were supposed to look like the painting.
Yeah, it's what Zelda's wearing in the painting, but I didn't get why. I was like, why? And but why? Oh, he's got a walking stick as well. I forgot he's got a fucking walking stick.
Do you know the only reason why it would make sense, right? But it doesn't make sense in the film, but it would make sense if it was in the book, is because this whole thing with this tribe and the Wendigo and all that sort of stuff was that when a body was reanimated, it wasn't the body that was reanimated. The body was brought back, possessed by somebody else.
Yes.
So in that instance, it could be possessed by one of the people from the oil painting. Therefore, he's dressing like himself as such. But it doesn't matter in the film because they don't touch on those aspects. So therefore, you can never take that from it.
No, because I started to wonder, are you film in some roundabout way trying to imply that he's inhabited by the vengeful spirit of Zelda? Like, because that's what she's wearing in the painting. Here's the thing, that is a complete fucking guess on my part because there's nothing there to link that up.
I mean, it shouldn't be true. Even like, although I can see why it would look like it could be, but it shouldn't be true. Even again, going back to that whole fucking tribe thing, because it wasn't just like any random person who died anywhere in the world can possess a body. It was part of the tribe. It's part of the people that worship the creature. Do you know what I mean? So it doesn't make sense in the film. I always felt like I never felt this when I was younger, but obviously after I'd read the book when I was older, I always felt like if anything got cut from this film, and because there are so many things I think that depend on it, that I feel like there may have been a scene that I don't think King would have cut this whole tribe Wendigo section. I feel like that if there was something that was cut, then maybe that was cut, because then as the film progresses, I'm like, oh, that's clearly going back to that thing. Why didn't they have it in there? You know?
Yeah, I really. It's not. I didn't mention it as an information part at the start, but it did kind of trigger. There is, of course, questions have been asked about the footage that was cut. However, it is confirmed that footage cannot be found. That footage no longer exists. There is no extended cut. There is no directors. There's no even slides to see. So what we see is what we get, unfortunately. Which, without going too far, is why a reimagining was a really good idea. Pity what they did with it, but we'll get to that at another time. So yeah, Rachel obviously shocked to see Gage, naturally, quite shocked, reaches down to hug him, and we kind of fade to black as we sort of see him holding the scalpel behind his back. And Rachel gives off what is, to me, the second best scream of the movie, beyond Lewis's earlier scream when Gage gets killed. I just think it sounds horrible. It sounds so horrible. Incredible. So we know she's dead. And that then transitions into Lewis waking up like suddenly in his bed. And he falls out of his bed and he bangs his head and he looks around and the bang in the head was quite funny.
I love that scene. It makes me laugh so much. Oh, I did think like, oh, maybe this is all a concussion dream.
He's right on the corner of that bedside table, man.
Yeah.
But he notices Gage's muddy footprints in the house and then finds that his bag's been opened and his scalpel's missing. So one of the things I initially thought I'd struggle with here, but after watching fully, was I was like, wait a minute, you know what you did. You shouldn't be shocked or you should be expecting trouble. But I realized that he was in a state of tired, grief-stricken, all that. He's now awake and he's realized instantly he's realized he's made a mistake. Yeah. He knows that. And I thought it was a really interesting thing because that ties into real life. When you've been super tired and super fucked up for whatever reason, shit, call it drunk if you want. And the next morning, you're like, oh, bollocks.
Make bad choices.
Yeah. Particularly as he gets a phone call from Gage. I didn't, at this point, I didn't bother asking how he knew how to dial on a phone and all that.
Yeah.
I ain't doing that. Not doing
the
that.
Number.
Yeah, know the number as well. But Gage says that he's played with Judd and Mommy and that he wants to play with Daddy too. Lewis handles this a little bit too well for my liking. He's a little bit too like, oh, all right, cool. See you soon, bro.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, Gage, what have you done, mate?
Yeah.
All right, I'll pop over.
But he basically does decide to try and fix his problem by filling some syringes with morphine and heads over to Judd's house. In there, he does encounter Church first on the way and kills the cat with an injection point in the house. So this has been a bit of a puzzle over how this part was filmed, and basically a humane veterinarian, people were involved and basically knocked the cat out. Everything was done on board. The correct people were there. The cat was knocked out and carefully dealt with. The needle that Lewis puts in.
I wonder if that maybe answers one of my points I always queried with this scene. I never understood why he put surgical gloves on before jabbing the cat.
Interesting.
I always felt that was quite odd. He's not a vet. He walks across there and he goes, right, surgical gloves on, and injects the cat. He didn't put them on like for anything else. And it wasn't
just this doctor side just almost taking over. And
maybe, but then he doesn't do it for like Gage or anything like that. I just felt it was quite an odd thing. It's like, maybe I just don't want to touch a yucky cat or something like that. But you would imagine, like, if you're like in that kind of like, right, I need to put this shit right. Oh my god, he's gone crazy. Like, I'll be over there like stabbing the fucking thing with scissors and a spoon, mate. I wouldn't be like, right, let me just here I come. You know, like, I don't know. I thought it was odd.
I realize this is some of this way you're picking apart necessarily so, but I also was like, aren't they undead? Can they just die from having an overdose of morphine? Isn't that just alive? Like, I understand being burnt, like the other things and all that, but like morphine.
Yeah.
Didn't quite follow that.
No, normally you'd have to destroy the body, don't you?
Yeah, I thought that was the point. Like, you know, particularly like, but you know, all right, fair enough. Some of them just like, you know what, well, at the end, it doesn't really matter that much because he goes in the house, looks around, ends up seeing some of Rachel's belongings, so is quite upset while Gage taunts him. And obviously the film decides, hey, it's not been dark enough, so let's have the attic fucking fall open, Rachel's body to fall out, having been strangled and dead. And I was like, God, that's horrible. That's horrible. Again, like, film. It's pretty horrible. It's also really well done shot because, of course, it's going to be a dummy, but they shoot it in an incredible way so you would never know it was a dummy.
Nah, agreed.
Unfortunately, what happens directly afterwards, you will know is a dummy because Gage is above. He kind of growls and then jumps down like head first, like fucking Superman toward
kind of floats down.
Lewis, and it's the most obvious dummy you've ever seen as Lewis struggles with Gage. Now they try to shoot it cleverly where they occasionally cut to Gage up face, and the boy has a good snarl. He has a good snarl as well. We should note the makeup they used on him to kind of give it look like his head's been patched together after being crushed by a truck. I did like too. It was subtle, and you remember funeral directors can do miracle jobs. Really fucking can. But basically, when he's struggling with him, man, if you've ever seen Child's Play, and when they're struggling with Chucky the doll, it's a doll, of course, it's that. And it looks obviously like that. The last part where he throws him away, it's like it's a dummy, and then they cut immediately to like Gage getting up on his hands and knees, and you're like, here's the thing, what can you complain about? That the fact that the kid wasn't involved?
Oh, I'm really annoyed that they didn't launch the actual kid across the room.
Absolutely. No, you can't. It's simply put, it's safe, it's smart, it is what it is. I'm fine with it. Yeah. And Cage kind of gets up and like Lewis kind of beckons him to come over, hug. Gage isn't even pretending he's got the scalpel and he's kind of growling and stuff like that. And I think you touched upon this at the very start. I think you get what is probably the film's most darkest and emotional scene. Because he injects Gage, and Gage, he reverts to being a kid. He starts to cry because of the pain from the syringe, and then starts to walk off going like, no fair. And here you see as well, the kid falls over and he like bangs his head on the back of the wall. And I was like, this kid is amazing.
Yeah, he like trips over he looks like he trips over a ladder or something like that.
Something,
it's like on the floor. Yeah, I remember watching that and thinking like, shit, I wonder if he meant to do that. They're like, oh, that was awesome. We'll keep that in.
Yeah, like it worked. Oh shit, it was an accident, but let's keep it in because it looked fucking good. But even like when he's lying there, like going under from the morphine, and he looks up at Lewis, I thought this was really horrible. And I thought it was one of the rare times I tried to put myself in Lewis's shoes and thought that'd be enough to drive you mad, right? Because you know all the events, and then this is still like, you're looking now at your son. Wow.
Yeah. His son died, you brought him back, and now you're killing him.
Incredible. And this then, you know, it's not done now because this film just can't be happy. Basically, Lewis drops fuel in the house, sets it on fire. And because the film decided it wasn't fucked up enough, and he also shows you a scene where the fire follows a trail up to Gage's body. And the model they use is really fucking good. So a moment I was like, oh shit, no, it's of course it's a dummy, but it looks very, and you see it go on fire. I'm like, God damn it, film. Like it feels, I almost say, it feels unnecessarily harsh. And like, it's such a rare thing for me to say, but because this film is constantly punching you. Like, I just was like, give me something that makes me feel good. I'm not going to get it because the rest of the fucking film is about to come, but, you know, just briefly give me something that feels good. So he carries Rachel's body out from the fire. Pascal appears and warns Lewis not to make it worse, but Lewis is completely grief-stricken beyond reason, saying that he believes Gage was dead too long and Rachel just died, so it'll definitely work this time. And Pascal vanishes screaming. So yeah, this scene.
Yep. That's horrid.
It's everyone's acting here. Lewis's delivery is really poor. Pascal's scream, it's just not done well.
Yep.
It also baffles me because in an earlier scene, when Rachel gets out of a truck after being given lift by a truck, Pascal leans out of the thing and says to her, even though she can't hear him, "It's the end of the line for me. I can't go no further. It won't let me." And at the time I said, wait, why? Well, where did that rule come into things? But then I was like, at the end, I was like, wait a minute, you dick. You said you couldn't go no further, but you're back again. Which is it? He just didn't want to help Rachel anymore.
He didn't like her either.
Of course, the last scene in the movie is a very quiet scene as he sort of plays solitaire on the floor in his home, dirty, clearly haven't buried Rachel. We kind of get shot from a low angle as the door opens and a very dirty leg and foot comes in. A sort of dirty hand grabs the knob and he looks up, smiles and stuff like that. He gets up and it's Rachel. We get a shot of a very nasty effect inside her face, oozing as well as he kisses her because that's extra gross. And the last scene is we see that Rachel has a large knife in her hand. And she swings it towards Lewis. The film cuts, goes dark, and you hear Lewis scream. So basically telling you what the score is there. It is just par for the course for the movie at this point. It's just darkness upon darkness upon darkness. And
hey, to be fair, King tried to not. That's the bit where he had to refilm the ending because the original ending, I think it was the ending in the book as well, leaves it up to you.
Yep.
Like, she comes back and he's sort of sitting there, and then that's where it ends.
Yep.
And then. So yeah, he tried to at least not have one more stabbing.
Yeah, it's weird because it's the studio that asked for this extra ending. Now, I don't mind the ending. I'm not complaining about it. I think the effect is really fucking cool. And it's just like, at this point, who cares? It's miserable enough already. It ain't going to do me any harm. But I'm a big fan of an ambiguous ending in the sense that we've seen the plot, we've seen it play out, and the events have come to a conclusion. But what effectively happens next? Because the thing is, you still get that because you're like, well, Rachel's undead. Like, who deals with her? So you've still got that whole no answer to that. But the idea of like leaving it ambiguous what happens to Lewis and what he does next, I don't know, I kind of like it, you know, because it's still dark. Yeah. It's Pet Sematary. I mean, I don't really know what else we can kind of add that we haven't talked through. I think...
the only thing I was just going to go back to, because I didn't think this previously. I only thought it just while we were talking about it now, and that was with Pascal and his "I can't go no further."
Yep.
But in the film, then that means that the only time Pascal is on site is when there is nothing from Pet Sematary walking around. I wonder if that was meant to be any kind of connection there. So you see him there a couple of times, but at that point, nothing's raised. He leaves to go with Rachel and Ellie.
Yeah.
Essentially, when Church is there.
Yep.
And he can't go any further when she comes back because Gage is there. And it's only when Gage and Church are both out of commission that he can then come back and talk to him. I don't know, it just popped into my head there. I was like, I wonder if it doesn't matter because it doesn't make sense in the film. But again, if it was more filled out, like with the whole information that was missing, like that was in the book,
yep,
that would kind of then make a lot of sense.
It's an interesting theory as well, and we should note that throughout this movie as well, there are lots of references as well to other Stephen King works, from locations to numbers to names to references. They're all there. There's a direct reference to Cujo, referring to a dog that went wild and all these sort of stuff. So it's all there. You can enjoy that for yourself, your Stephen King nerd stuff. Here's the thing. I think this movie works well on two fronts. I think it works well as a decent adaptation of a novel. It is a decent adaptation. It is. For all the flaws we've picked apart with the pacing and the plot points that we feel are unfinished or misdirected or just unnecessary, I think it still does a good job of what it is. But I also think it nails this important aspect. As a standalone film, as a movie that you could watch without having read the book or any real knowledge about the source material, you can enjoy it as a horror movie. And I think that's super important to us. That's something that's often really lacking with King's work.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, it is well, at least I think it is heralded as a classic. I think
so.
And I agree. And like, I have so many things in the film that I don't like, and there are so many things in the film that I think don't make sense. Like, so many times the film's biggest failings are that either because of cuts or because of bad writing, it just uses randomness to move the story forward. Like, and I saw so many points where I was just, and there's a point, like, for example, where it wants to move it forward now, and him to see that church has come back. So he goes out in the garden to like do some gardening, and he starts raking the garden. It's all got leaves everywhere. He rakes about 6 leaves and then goes and puts the rake back in the shed. And it's like, well, hang on, dude, you haven't even
jumps in, yeah.
And but that was just purely so that church can then snarl at him in the shed, and it does a lot of stupid things like that. But I think when you come out the other end of this film, I think the overall feeling that you get from it is that this is actually quite a creepy, pretty depressing as well movie to watch, man. I think it's acted well enough that nobody destroys it, like makes it unwatchable. I think there are some fucking brilliant moments. I think the practical effects in it are really good, especially the wounds on all of them. You know, from Victor to Rachel, all of it. I think they're all done fucking fantastically.
Yeah.
And some of the most important scenes in the film are just phenomenal. Whether it's Gage, you know, his death.
Yep.
You know, I think there are bad moments in the film, but they were never bad at pivotal moments. And I think that's just like really important, isn't it? I think like if you fuck up the Gage death thing, you fuck the whole film. So that had to be perfect, and like things like that had to be perfect. I think it's a cracking movie. I really do, and I do think it's a very good adaptation, but it just fails slightly on the adaptation thing. Not its fault, because you just can't put the level of detail you get in a book into a film. It doesn't matter how hard you try. Short story, you can. A reasonable sized novel, you've got to cut the bits out of it.
It's something that we can completely understand, except, and I echo everything you're saying. Ultimately, I think the film gets what needs to be done right. I think it gives us iconic, memorable scenes that people still remember to these days, whether it be Zelda, whether it be Gage, whether it be Rachel at the end. It's just so many iconic moments, and that's such a rarity. Yeah, exactly that. In fact, they would literally, you know, again, remake, they would stick with that complete death as well because of its iconic nature and stuff like that. But ultimately, when you're talking about Stephen King adaptation, people tend to remember often the moments that are silly and cheesy and go, oh, I remember that because that was stupid and stuff like that. People don't do that with Pet Sematary because ultimately there's nothing really that I ever could even point at and say, well, no, that was dumb. That was silly. That was cheesy. I didn't like that. There are moments where I think line delivery or dialogue or interaction just doesn't quite work for me, and I find it a bit cringy. But I do think that goes back to what you said at the start, is I'm a lot more critical these days than I ever was in the past. I'm looking sometimes for things that necessarily aren't even being fair. Like, oh, I'm picking on that because I know it can be done better, or I've seen this better and stuff like that. But I was invested. I've seen this movie a fair few times beforehand, and I was still invested. I still cared about Gage. I still got bothered by his death. I still sat down and went, oh, that's fucking horrible. And it bothers me in aspects like that, you know?
Yeah. I think as well, like you can always tell, like, as well, I'm not sure when you kind of like rewatch these or if you rewatch them for this or not, but like I watched both of the films, including the remake, previously, and then rewatched them again recently just to have them fresh in my mind. And I guess the respect I have for this film comes out even. I realize it more when I watch the remake. Like, do you know what I mean? That kind of rams it home because then I'm referencing back to this film, and this film must be a good film because I am constantly. We'll get to this at a later video, but in the remake, going, no, they did it better. They did it better. They did it better. You know,
So,
so it has to be a good film because
for
otherwise,
context,
yeah.
because what you asked the question for context. I watched a remake for the first time, the only time I've seen it, directly after this movie. It was my wife's idea because I was like, no, I don't really want to do it. I don't want to do it. She was like, oh no, let's do it. And I was like, fine, let's watch it. So I watched it directly after. So I had that mirror fucking effect.
Yeah.
And I said, I have the notes, we have discussed, we have watched it. It will be coming in the future. It's not for this, obviously, this specific video, but yeah, it'll be a fun one, I think, because of the contrast between this as well. Yeah, I think we'll call it there. That's Pet Sematary. We've gone 14 away. We've gone Pet Sematary. It's not been a bad run so far. What do you think? Do you think is Pet Sematary iconic to you? Do you think we're being overtly critical of things that don't really bother you, or have you got points that we've missed and you think, no, that don't work for me, or you agree or disagree with us overall? You know what to do. Hit us in the comments. Yeah. Thank you very much for watching. You can check us out on gbhbl.com as well as on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and Tumblr. Go to Patreon to help us out over there. That's patreon.com/gbhbl, as well as Big Cartel, where you can find some of our merchandise. We have a podcast running on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts. And of course, if you like this video, do us a favour, hit the subscribe button and help the channel grow. Games, horror and heavy metal. What else is life for?